Imagine a truck so affordable, so simple, yet so powerful, it could change the lives of millions across rural Africa. Now imagine that the largest automakers in the world, with billions in research and development, can't replicate it. Sounds impossible? That's exactly the reality unfolding today. In Zimbabwe, a small team of engineers led by Maxwell Chikumbutso built a $3,000 truck designed for the realities of rural life. Rough roads, minimal fuel, scarce maintenance facilities, and communities that can't afford conventional vehicles. This isn't a prototype for the rich. This isn't a flashy concept. It's real. And it's already moving. The truck runs efficiently on self-sustaining energy technology, drastically reducing fuel costs. Its modular parts are easy to repair, often with locally available materials. Farmers can haul crops without borrowing money for diesel. Small businesses can transport goods without crippling expenses. Clinics can deliver vaccines to remote villages. Every aspect of the design addresses poverty, not profit. Meanwhile, global automakers are watching closely. Ford, Toyota, and other giants have attempted to create low-cost trucks for emerging markets, but they keep running into the same problem: complexity. Batteries, electronics, supply chains, and profit margins make truly affordable vehicles almost impossible. They can't compete with a vehicle that costs $3,000 to build and maintain, and that's before considering that Maxwell's truck uses self-powered innovations they don't yet understand. The first deliveries were modest, a handful of trucks to local cooperatives, NGOs, and small entrepreneurs. But word spread fast. Videos appeared on social media showing farmers carrying double the harvest, mechanics easily repairing engines in open-air workshops, and rural schools receiving essential supplies they couldn't before. It didn't take long for governments to notice. Suddenly, development agencies were asking questions, donors were curious, and local officials began testing the trucks for wider distribution. The impact was immediate. Productivity went up. Costs went down. Communities that struggled for decades suddenly found mobility within reach. And then came the global attention. Analysts ran the numbers. A $3,000 truck capable of self-sustaining operation could, in theory, replace fleets of aging, fuel-hungry vehicles, save billions annually in operating costs, and provide reliable transport to millions of people in underserved regions. The implications weren't just economic, they were revolutionary. Ford's engineers tried to understand the design. They studied images, prototypes, and leaked diagrams. They built simulations. But every attempt to replicate it ended in failure. Components were either too expensive, too complex, or impossible to source locally. Meanwhile, Maxwell's truck was already in the hands of people who needed it the most: affordable, functional, and impactful. For the people living in Africa's remote regions, this wasn't about innovation for the sake of headlines. It was about survival, opportunity, and independence. Farmers no longer had to rely on unpredictable transport. Teachers could deliver materials to far-flung schools. Clinics could make timely deliveries of medicines. And every kilometer driven without fuel or costly repairs was money that stayed in the community. But while Maxwell's truck was transforming lives on the ground, the global automotive industry was facing a dilemma. They had the knowledge, the capital, the factories, but not the adaptability. And in the race to deliver mobility to underserved markets, agility was suddenly more valuable than scale. The $3,000 African truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement. It was proof that innovation doesn't require billions of dollars. It requires understanding the real-world problems people face and solving them in ways that scale locally. And now, whispers are growing. Some say Maxwell's team is planning the next iteration, a version that could transport entire communities, power small grids, and operate completely independently of traditional fuel. If that happens, it could redefine not just rural transport, but the very idea of energy and mobility in emerging regions. As news of the truck spread beyond Africa, curiosity turned into scrutiny. Automotive analysts in Europe and the US began dissecting every leaked photo, every video clip, trying to figure out how a $3,000 vehicle could achieve what even multi-billion-dollar companies struggled to do. Whiteboard simulations, CAD models, and virtual prototypes failed to replicate the simplicity and durability of Maxwell's design. Meanwhile, in rural Zimbabwe, the real impact was impossible to ignore. A small fleet of these trucks delivered grains to markets that had previously been unreachable during the rainy season. Farmers doubled their sales. Women's cooperatives transported handicrafts without paying exorbitant transport fees, and health workers could reach isolated villages without worrying about fuel shortages. Every day, more people began to see mobility not as a luxury, but as a tool for survival. Ford engineers, frustrated by their inability to copy the design, started comparing notes. Some admitted internally that Maxwell's approach, modular, low-cost, locally reparable, and energy-efficient, wasn't something you could mass-produce in a typical factory without completely changing the business model. Traditional automakers rely on centralized production, expensive parts, and proprietary systems. Maxwell had flipped the script entirely. At the same time, small manufacturers and local workshops began experimenting with Maxwell-inspired adaptations. Open-source schematics, carefully shared with select engineers, allowed communities to tweak and improve the design. Some added cargo extensions, others reinforced the chassis for heavier loads, and a few even tested hybrid self-powered energy units that could supplement the truck's operation during longer journeys. Maxwell's team watched quietly, guiding the process with subtle mentorship rather than controlling it. The goal was not global domination, it was empowerment. And yet, the ripple effect was inevitable. International NGOs, rural development programs, and even government agencies started requesting deliveries. The once skeptical media now ran headlines like, "The $3,000 truck that could change Africa forever." Even competitors couldn't ignore it. Ford, Toyota, and Mahindra held emergency strategy sessions. Analysts calculated potential revenue losses if the truck reached wide-scale adoption. The realization was stark. A low-cost, self-powered, locally maintainable vehicle could undercut decades of investment in fuel-based logistics, spare part supply chains, and traditional rural transport models. And yet, Maxwell remained several steps ahead. While the corporate world debated patents and market control, he was planning the next phase, a larger vehicle capable of carrying goods to entire regions without refueling, a mobile energy hub that could power small villages while transporting essential supplies. The narrative began shifting from curiosity to fear. Because this wasn't just about trucks anymore, it was about independence. Communities that once relied on external systems could now generate mobility and energy on their own terms. For the first time, people could escape dependence on costly fuel, unreliable grids, or monopolized supply chains. And as the story spread online, global reactions ranged from awe to panic. Investors in traditional automotive sectors scrambled, governments quietly assessed regulatory gaps, and engineers everywhere tried to reverse engineer a solution. But Maxwell's genius lay in simplicity. Unlike high-tech EVs with complex batteries and electronics, this truck relied on durability, modularity, and locally sourced repairs. Every part was designed with scarcity in mind, every component accessible, every repair feasible, without expensive machinery. And the world was watching. Because if a $3,000 truck could do this in rural Africa, what else could be reimagined for communities long ignored by traditional industry? By now, whispers of Maxwell's $3,000 truck had reached the boardrooms of multinational automakers. Ford held a high-level emergency briefing. Charts displayed projected losses if Maxwell's model reached scale. Billions of dollars in revenue threatened, supply chains disrupted, and decades of investment in rural transport rendered irrelevant. The executives looked at one another, realizing that money, factories, and technology alone could not solve the problem. Ford engineers tried reverse engineering the concept. They studied videos, analyzed the modular chassis, simulated energy efficiency, and examined wheelbase schematics. Yet every attempt failed. Components were either too expensive, impossible to source locally, or incompatible with the design's simplicity. Even Tesla engineers, curious about the self-powered adaptations, admitted privately that the truck's combination of energy efficiency and repairability was beyond conventional industrial logic. Meanwhile, the impact on the ground continued to escalate. Villages that had never seen reliable transport now had fleets of these trucks. Market days became transformative. Farmers delivered more crops, artisans transported goods, and mobile clinics traveled further and faster than ever before. Communities began to thrive where poverty had previously dictated opportunity. Local workshops became innovation hubs. Mechanics and engineers started improvising upgrades, reinforced suspensions for heavy loads, solar-assisted generators for extended trips, and custom cargo modules for schools and hospitals. What started as a simple truck had become a platform for localized engineering and community empowerment. The narrative was shifting. The truck was no longer just a vehicle, it was a symbol of independence, a challenge to decades of industrial hierarchy. And while Maxwell's team guided these improvements subtly, the world outside couldn't contain the story. Media outlets began running headlines. Africa's $3,000 truck outsmarts global automakers, and self-powered African truck threatens traditional rural markets. As demand grew, Maxwell quietly prepared for the next step. He envisioned a larger vehicle capable of carrying not just goods, but entire communities during disasters or infrastructure collapse. He planned mobile energy hubs integrated into the chassis, capable of powering schools, clinics, and entire villages while on the move. Corporations scrambled, governments assessed policy gaps, and energy companies realized the implications. If trucks like this could run independently, diesel sales would drop. Grid dependency would decline. Conventional logistics would no longer dominate rural transport. And for communities, the payoff was immediate. More money, more mobility, more independence. Then came the moment that forced the world to pay attention. A short video, filmed by a rural farmer, went viral. It showed 3 trucks carrying double their normal load across flooded terrain. They delivered grain, medical supplies, and water purification units, all without a single drop of fuel. The caption read simply, "While the world waits, we move." For engineers, economists, and investors watching worldwide, the message was clear. Innovation had moved faster than their systems, and Maxwell had done it without the massive budgets, patents, or corporate machinery that they relied on. And while the global powers debated, small communities celebrated. Their independence had arrived quietly, without fanfare, and without needing approval from anyone. But Maxwell wasn't stopping there. The final phase of his vision involved scaling not just within Africa, but across regions where infrastructure was weak, fuel was expensive, and access to mobility was a barrier to survival. He wanted to show the world that affordable innovation, designed with humanity in mind, could outperform billion-dollar corporate strategies. The question that now hung in the air was no longer about the truck's affordability, or even its efficiency. The question was, how long before the rest of the world has to adapt to Maxwell's revolution? As whispers of Maxwell's revolution spread to boardrooms and government offices, panic quietly set in. Ford and other automakers commissioned secret research teams to reverse engineer the $3,000 truck, but every attempt failed. They could replicate parts of the chassis, the modular design, or the energy-efficient systems, but never the combination that made it both ultra-affordable and ultra-resilient. Meanwhile, in rural Africa, the real impact was impossible to ignore. Farmers began forming informal cooperatives, pooling multiple trucks to transport harvests to distant markets in record time. Clinics equipped with the vehicles could reach remote villages with life-saving medicines, and schools received books, computers, and supplies they had never accessed before. Communities that had once been isolated now found themselves connected, productive, and empowered. Markets that had relied on unreliable transport suddenly thrived. Every mile traveled by Maxwell's trucks was a mile away from dependency and poverty. Word of these successes reached the global development community. NGOs, initially skeptical, began quietly funding small fleets of the trucks to test their scalability. Videos circulated of trucks navigating muddy roads, flooded rivers, and broken bridges, all without refueling, all without technical failures. Ford and other automakers, despite their billions, began to realize the threat. The $3,000 truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a platform for a new model of development. Their R&D teams ran endless simulations, trying to find a loophole, a shortcut, a way to mass-produce affordability without sacrificing reliability, but the design was too elegant in its simplicity. Maxwell, however, remained several steps ahead. While corporate engineers struggled, he quietly expanded production using local workshops, small-scale manufacturing hubs, and community-driven supply chains. Each truck built was a direct investment in the local economy, employing people, sourcing parts locally, and creating skills that had been absent for generations. And then came the moment that forced even global analysts to pay attention. A viral video showed a convoy of 10 trucks crossing an entire region in a single day, delivering food, water, and medical supplies to dozens of villages. The caption read, "No fuel, no grid, no limits." Economists calculated the ripple effect: billions of dollars in lost fuel revenue, thousands of new businesses, hundreds of thousands of people gaining access to markets and services that had been impossible before. Governments began quietly questioning their policies, realizing that traditional subsidies and infrastructure investments were suddenly obsolete in the face of Maxwell's innovation. Meanwhile, grassroots engineers and mechanics began modifying the trucks themselves, adding solar-assisted energy modules, reinforced cargo areas, and even small mobile clinics integrated into the chassis. The vehicle had become more than a truck. It was a mobile lifeline, a platform for localized innovation, and a symbol of independence. In the shadows, corporate lobbyists started drafting memos, trying to slow the spread. They couldn't block production entirely. They could only attempt to regulate it, restrict components, or push competing technologies. But Maxwell had anticipated this. Every truck was independent, every supply chain decentralized, and every community it reached became self-sufficient. The question no one could answer yet was this: how long before the $3,000 truck inspired a new generation of vehicles that could make poverty history across the globe, not just in Africa? By the end of the year, Maxwell's $3,000 trucks had reached hundreds of communities, transforming markets, clinics, and schools. They moved quietly, without fanfare, without headlines, but with undeniable impact. Farmers who once struggled to sell crops now transported double the harvest. Health workers reached remote villages without fear of running out of fuel. Children had access to schools that had previously been unreachable. Global automakers continued to struggle, unable to replicate the combination of affordability, durability, and energy independence. Governments and investors realized that a new model of mobility and empowerment was already spreading faster than policy, regulations, or capital could contain. Maxwell never sought fame. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't ask for awards. Instead, he focused on solving real-world problems, quietly proving that ingenuity, when applied to the right challenges, could reshape entire communities. The $3,000 African truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was a movement, a symbol of independence, a testament to what happens when innovation prioritizes people over profit. And while the world debated patents, profits, and production, millions of lives had already changed. Because sometimes, the greatest revolutions don't announce themselves. They simply arrive, silently, and reshape the world forever.